Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm here to talk about the critical race narrative perspective. So, my name is Josette. I am 29 years old, and I want to talk about how racial identity development theory was kind of introduced to me, what I understand about it, and how it's helped me examine and understand my own racial identity. So, pretty much from my understanding, we have been conditioned at a very young age to learn about racial identity, to kind of understand like what social cues give it, what social cues we receive from society that tells us what group we belong to. As far as for myself, I want to say that I was early on very categorized into the Hispanic racism, ethnicity as we call. This usually did happen about, I think I noticed this in my teenage years, that I was more Hispanic than other children in my age group in high school. I think it's because I started to see like little cliques of people who would just mesh together better, and usually I would tend to hang out with the more Hispanic kids. So that's kind of where my awareness came in that I was Hispanic. We all spoke the language of Spanish as our first language, and then English as our second language. I think also when I went to college, they told me I had to take a English class, English test. And so when I did, that was my cue of like, oh, is my English not like not well? But really it was. Well, it was just because of, it being my second language in this state, in this country. I did feel a little bit of confusion and guilt, denial growing up, because some of the Hispanic norms and cultures is established, along with religion. Religion in the Hispanic race identity is more Catholicism. So, like growing up in my early 20s, I felt some sort of shame because I wasn't a part of that, and that was like a violation to my ethnicity in a way with my family. So that is like one way that I came to realize, the values and the core culture practices that, usually Hispanics made. But, looking back to characteristics, physical characteristics I have, as you can see, I'm blonde and I have blue eyes. So a lot of people would try to speak to me in English, thinking that I didn't speak Spanish here in a Spanish dominant language border town. So with that being said, it was really hard growing up, trying to explain to everybody, hey, I speak English, I speak Spanish, I speak Spanish, trying to kind of cover like my physical attributes to what the Hispanic race is identified as, and it's usually like brown skin, totally complete opposite to me. So that's kind of how I grew up. But then it was such a guilt, like I said, choosing Hispanic and the American culture, because I did grow up here in the United States. So, and I was born here. So my mom grew up in Mexico across the border. She doesn't speak English. So like it was one of those things where we call Chicanos, Mexican American, where you grew up here, but your culture is from Mexico. It was hard because I wouldn't fit into the Mexico culture because I had a lot of, I'd go across the border to Mexico, and it was like a lot of American tendencies I had. I grew up in school here, so I spoke a lot of English, versus my family over there. It was like pure Spanish, and I didn't understand. I was considered the gringa, because I didn't fit into their dynamic in Mexico. But then I am here in the US, and then it was always a struggle of like, oh, but you're Hispanic, you're Latina, like you speak Spanish, or you connect better with Mexicans than Americans. It was such a racial thing growing up. So I never really went through any type of racism or anything like that. Honestly, I do feel like now that I'm learning more about in this class about, like identities and stuff, I do feel like my physical appearance had a lot to do with me not experiencing any sort of racism. But I did see my mother, even though she was light skinned and blue eyes, she didn't speak the American language, and I did see her go through a lot of racism. In fact, she didn't want to move out of town in this, small town that we live in because she felt like if we moved literally to another city or state, there was not going to be any Hispanics or Spanish speaking people. So I didn't experience it, but I know my mom did. And I really feel like it did affect her development. It did affect her adulthood. And I feel like her perception of people, Americans, are very racist. Her perception of like law enforcement and border patrol and all that, it's just like completely not a positive one because of the culture, So I want to say that people that do describe stuff like that as a social worker, I do feel like we need to take a stand. I do feel like we need to encourage people to, value where they come from, create that sense of identity where they feel safe, and internally and externally as well, no matter what they look like. And I also feel like we can definitely bring out characteristics in a person, bring out their strengths so that they're not so focused on what society thinks about them, and building those boundaries along with that. So that's kind of how I feel like social workers can respond differently, as well as each person. Thanks.